Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Tanya Cribb. I'm the director of the Plattsburgh State Art Museum, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the symposium entitled Creative Catalysts Exploring Rockwell Kent's Alaskan Adventure. As some of you know, SUNY Plattsburgh has the distinct privilege of caring for and interpreting the largest collection of Rockwell Kent's work and material in the United States. As such, we always seek to raise the awareness and increase scholarship of the legacy that was entrusted to us by Rockwell Kent's third wife, Sally Gorton. Before we start today's events, I would be remiss if I didn't draw attention to all of those who had made this special event possible. I want to call out the Student Association. They are instrumental in helping the museum conduct this type of programming, and we're grateful that the students support us. But I'd also like to acknowledge our museum docent volunteers, whom are the face of the museum, and we would not have the services that we have without them. They're wonderful. We are a small but mighty staff, so I want to acknowledge Edith Ellis and Walter Early, who are also just an incredible part of this team and make events like this possible every day. I'd like to acknowledge the IT department who've been helping us out with technical difficulties right now. We're grateful to them. Also, library leadership who partnered with us because the Rockwell Kent Gallery is housed in the library. And I also want to acknowledge Lauren Zito and her students who will be joining us for another portion of the symposium events today. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome our guest today. Eric Downs is an independent filmmaker from South Central Alaska who will be sharing his film, A Dreamer's Search, with us later today. Doug Capra, who's joining us via Zoom, is an independent is an author and a historian living in Seward, Alaska, and he's the foremost expert on Rockwell Kent's 1918 Alaskan adventure. And Claudia McGehee, award-winning author and illustrator of 10 natural history-themed picture books, including My Wilderness, an Alaskan Adventure, which is a historic fiction memoir based on Rockwell Kent's and son Rocky's time on Fox Island, Alaska. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Downs, who I met a couple of years ago as he was researching our Rockwell Kent material for his film, and he will start the presenter.
Hello. Hey, let's all first of all give a nice round of applause for Tanya and her team and all the people supporting this event. It's just really special to be able to try to share this story with a wider audience. So yeah, I thought we could kick off by kind of getting to know the presenters. Thank you so much for the great introduction. I got a couple questions for the three of us. Why don't we start with Claudia? Claudia, tell us about your background, where you're currently based, and what you're up to these days.
Thank you, Eric. And I want to thank Edith and Tanya and Eric especially for getting me connected here today to be able to speak with you. A shout out to is this better? To Scott Ferris in the back, who gave me some direction very early on in my project about 20 years ago. So, and I'm just very happy to be here. I am an illustrator based out of Iowa City, Iowa. I have been illustrating for about 25 years now, mostly children's books, but I take a page from Rockwell Kent's book. I'm also a commercial illustrator as well, so you'll find my work on coffee cups and murals and mugs and whatever I can, make the bread and butter on. But my specialty is children's books, and that's what connects me with Rockwell Kent. And I'll expand on that in my presentation soon here. But I have this adage that I go by. It's buy a film screenwriter that I love, Horton Foote. He did the adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird and A Trip to Bountiful, beautiful film. But he said, I don't find stories, stories find me. And I agree that Kent certainly found me and gave me the base of this picture book that I'll be telling you more about.
Thank you. Doug, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your background, where you're currently based, and what you are up to these days.
Well, I was born and raised in Massachusetts. Now I'm based in Seward. I've been here over 50 years now. I'm a writer and a journalist. I have a BA and an MA from Northeastern University in Boston, where I did my graduate and undergraduate work. And while I was in Massachusetts, I explored the Maine wilderness a lot on canoe trips, which I think eventually got me to Alaska. For a while, I studied acting in London, and I worked in the theater for a while. I came to Alaska in 1971 as a teacher, high school and college teacher. My first job was way out in the Aleutian Islands, on the island of Adak. It was, at that time, it was a Cold War naval base. I retired from teaching, became a national park ranger for about 16, 17 years. And after that, I worked on cruise ships for a while as a lecturer and naturalist. Of course, you know, I'll talk about Kent in your next question probably, but what I'm up to now, Kent interrupted me. I'm just finishing up a book called The Last Homesteaders, and it's about a couple that homesteaded up here. It's a true story. In the late 60s and 1970s, it's an adventure story about the treacherous Gulf of Alaska. They were based in Seward, but every trip out to their home site on the coast, they passed by Fox Island all the day. So I get Rockwell Kent into the book too. So it's an interesting story. It takes place in the late 60s and 70s. The hippie invasion, the drug culture, back to the land movement, the Vietnam War, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the civil rights movement, women's movement, and up in Alaska, the pipeline was being built, land issues were being settled, the demographics of Alaska was changing. It's just it's fascinating period. I was in touch with the siblings, have a lot of journals, letters, photographs. So The Last Homesteaders, hopefully finishing it up in the next month and getting off to a publisher.
That sounds exciting. So my name is Eric Downs. I am from Alaska, born and raised in Alaska. My parents are from Keysville, New York. And so after they graduated high school, they went on some adventures and eventually ended up in Keysville. They eventually ended up in Alaska, where I was born. I'm sure they did eventually come back to Keysville, but they settled in Alaska, where I was born. My dad became an Alaskan bush pilot. And so I grew up across the inlet, flying into our cabin on the weekends. And for me, I feel so grateful that my life just seemed like one big adventure. And I was always given the freedom to imagine. And so I've always kind of felt like a storyteller and had this imagination to tell stories. So my background, though, professionally, I'm a construction manager. I run the family construction business. So I'm a bit of a builder turned filmmaker. Discovered Rockwell Kent's story while on a special trip with my cousin, who's from the North Country. She came up for a visit, and I was, I guess, mildly interested when I saw Kent's paintings and drawings. But when Doug came into the coffee shop in Seward in 2014 with binders under his arms, I was sucked in, and Doug drew us I like to call it a treasure map of where we could find the ruins of the cabin out on the island. And from that day on, I had been on a journey to not only reconnect with the wilderness, that connection I had as a child, but also chase my dream of becoming a filmmaker. And so here we are today. Let's see, next question. In fact, I just kind of touched on my journey. Doug, how about you? What originally connected you to Rockwell Kent, and what projects have you created because of that connection?
Oh, well, when I first came to Alaska in 1971, there were still a lot of the old pioneers still alive. I mean, I met people who climbed the Chilkoot Trail into the Klondike Gold Rush. They were still alive. There are people who had come into Resurrection Bay on steamers before there was even a town. The town was founded in 1903. So I met a few people. One particular, his name was John Paulsteiner. He was around when Rockwell Kent was there, so he started telling me stories. And then I met Hazel Ray. She had come into town on that steamer before there was a town. And then her daughter, Pat Williams, and all these other Seward, Alaska pioneers told me about Rockwell Kent, but there always seemed to be a little mystery, the things they weren't telling me. And that got me researching. And when David Traxel's book, The Biography and American Saga, came out in 1980, that was the first time I could really learn anything about him. There was no internet at the time, and it wasn't until later that I contacted a lot of the people at Plattsburgh and with the Kent Collector. But I really started to come alive when I started exploring the old Seward newspapers from the period when Rockwell Kent was there, and I ended up finding some information that wasn't in Traxel's book. Of course, I was in touch with him. We had, you know how it is, the book comes out and then somebody finds the information. And that's what happened to him there. And so I started writing articles for the Kent Collector and many other articles. What I'm up to now, I've written a play, and now The World Again. But the research during the last few years, it really means I've got to rewrite the play again, because there's not only the quiet adventure he describes in Wilderness, but there's the unquiet adventure that I'll talk about today. In 2018, I started a webpage that followed Rockwell Kent 100 years later. In 2018, following him from 1918 as he crossed the country with Rocky, using all the letters and journals that my wife and I could find. She helped me transcribe the letters. We transcribed about 100,000 words in letters, and I saw a whole new story there, and that's all on the website that I'll talk about. When I do the presentation. Otherwise, I'm finishing up The Last Homesteaders. And then this is the 100th anniversary in July of the completion of the Alaska Railroad. Kent was here when they were building the railroad, and so I'll be writing some history about that. So that's where I am today.
Thanks, Doug. Claudia, what originally connected you to Rockwell Kent, and what projects have you created because of that connection?
Because of my commercial illustration side, I think that I first discovered Kent through some of his bold black and white work, his woodcuts, engravings, and my own medium of scratchboard, which I'll be showing you later, is very similar visually. And so I also knew of his book Moby Dick as well, or his illustrations in the book Moby Dick. And so when I was in Chicago, because I don't live too far away, about 3 hours away, there was a retrospective show of Kent in 2001 that came to the Terra Museum of American Art. And so I went there to view it, and with the thought that I'd just be looking at his graphic work more, but I was so overwhelmed and stunned by his paintings. And in one in particular, the father and the son, Wilderness, with the figure of the father figure with the son in an embrace, was so tender to me. And I thought, this has to be autobiographical. There's something about it that draws me that way. And just with the museum information and what little I could piece together at the show, I realized that was a story I wanted to pursue. So that's how the seed of the story of how I made the picture book began. It took about, 10 years to actually fulfill, but that's the way things go in my world, kind of slow and fast and slow again. But that's my connection to Kent initially.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to throw in the origin of the actual film that screening tonight. I had met Doug in 2014 and was energized by Kent's story. uh, leading up to the 100-year anniversary of Kent's Alaskan adventure, I reached out to Doug and asked how I could be of service and how I help. And he inquired about me possibly. He knew I liked to do videos, and so he inquired about me doing a short documentary about Kent's adventure. I think we both kind of had in mind like a 5-minute YouTube video. And so slowly, over time, very slowly, that 5-minute YouTube video turned into a 29-minute narrative film called A Dreamer's Search. Okay, Doug, last question for this round. What is the one message or theme from Rockwell Kent's Alaskan adventure that you feel is most important to share or pass on?
Well, that's not a fair question. So I have to give you about 3 quotes that kind of sum this up. The quiet adventure. He calls the book Wilderness a quiet adventure. These are the times in life when nothing happens, but in quietness, the soul expands. That's one, I think, important message. Okay, the importance of solitude, particularly in wilderness. Another quote, the great festivals of our lives are those at which we dance ourselves. Okay, like the Stoics, control what you can control and do it if you can control it, and accept and endure what you can't. That's another message. Then there's the unquiet adventure that I'm going to talk about today. And that's about the power of our shadow, our demonic dynamism, negative energy. Okay. Don't let it destroy you. Energy is energy. Use it to move you forward. Artists always face obstacles, blocks, limits. As poet and writer Wendell Berry said, it is the impeded spring that sings. All these difficulties have power. Use them. And that's what we're going to see. And one other quote here, vaster is man than his work. That's a Rockwell Kent quote that Carl Ziegesar quotes, his friend. And this is what Ziegesar wrote. It is understandable that artists might not give the supreme accolade to Rockwell Kent's paintings, nor the writers to his books. It may well be his title to immortality will be as heroic all-around personality among the later great affirmations of individuality. I mean, his life, okay? I think his life was his greatest work. I'm not denigrating his paintings, his art. I think they're beautiful. I love them. But Kent's art and his writing, his life is his greatest work. I was reminded of that when I don't know if you've seen it, but the Genius series of films on National Geographic. There was one 10-part series on Picasso, and there was one 10-part series on Einstein, based on the book Einstein's Wife. And these tried to show the role that women had in these people's lives, which these women were never given the credit they deserve. And that's what I'm going to talk about his first wife, Kathleen. So there you go. These are the messages I think that I'd like to get across today.
Thanks, Doug. Claudia, what is the one message or theme, or 1 or 3 or 5, from Rockwell Kent's Alaskan adventure that you feel is the most important to share?
It's hard to follow Doug here, but I would say, just to begin with, my feeling for while I was preparing for this presentation, that I realized I was a young mother when I first saw the Rockwell Kent Distant Shore show, and I had a daughter who is still a toddler. And as an artist, I would try and fit in being a parent and also being an artist and hitting my deadlines. I even fell asleep in the bathtub once, just, trying to get everything done. So when I discovered Rockwell Kent's story of going to the island and being an artist and absorbing, also being a parent, it was like a fantasy to me. And I look back and I think that's what drew me to his story as well. But the one message I would like to say that I get from Kent's story is make space for creativity, no matter who you are, no matter if you're a full-time artist or a carpenter, an accountant, anyone. We have to make space. And in that solitude, we thrive as humans.
I like the water drip at the end. That was perfect. Yeah, I really like those answers. Theme that I came across, similar to Kent's quote that Doug said at the beginning. Strange thing is I Googled this quote and I couldn't find it attributed to anyone. But the quote that kept coming back to me while I was on the island was, "The quietest places speak the loudest." So now more than ever, we're surrounded by distractions and noise and things that push us in all different directions. And so sometimes it takes a special place, a quiet place, a place that's bigger than ourselves for us to be able to focus in, consider the things that are most important in life. For me, Kent had an amazing amount of courage to keep chasing after his dream, many failures and challenges. And so his trip to Alaska was this kind of last ditch effort to realize his dream of becoming a respected and successful artist. And so that's kind of the theme that I always go back to is I really feel like all of us have a true calling inside us, and it takes a lot of courage to dig down deep and chase after that dream. And so that's also the thing what's so important to support young people. Sometimes things don't make sense on paper. Things seem a little crazy. Why would you need to travel all the way to Alaska when you can just go to Maine? As artists, we can't explain that. We don't know. We just have to go. So it's important to consider when people take those journeys to try and it doesn't make sense. So that kind of concludes our question the presenter section, but I would like to thank all of you so much for joining us and remind everyone that we are an open book. So please feel free to reach out to any of us, whether it's in person, in the hallway, reach out to us online. We love to talk about Rockwell Kent and his work and try to bridge the gap. I know both Claudia and I and Doug are so excited to try and share this story with a wider audience and pass these very important messages and stories along. Thank you.